The anomaly appeared on a stormy Wednesday evening, first detected by the Deep Space Observatory in Chile. Dr. Sarah Chen almost dismissed it as another piece of space debris until the object changed direction. Twice. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to alert the International Space Agency. Within hours, every major observatory on Earth confirmed the same thing. An artificial object, roughly 2 kilometers in length, was decelerating as it approached Earth orbit. Its surface absorbed nearly all electromagnetic radiation, making it appear as a void against the stars. The vessel, as they now called it, took up position in geosynchronous orbit above the Indian Ocean. For 3 days, it simply waited. World leaders argued, militaries mobilized, and civilians alternated between panic and fascination. But the ship remained silent. On the 4th day, it spoke. The message came simultaneously to every digital device on Earth, bypassing all known communication protocols. The aliens called themselves the Witnesses, and they had traveled across galaxies to deliver a warning. Humanity was about to face extinction. We have observed 1,342 civilizations, the message stated. We have watched the Nexus consume 1,341 of them. You are next. The Witnesses ship projected a holographic display visible from every major city on Earth. It showed mechanical swarms consuming entire planets, converting all matter into more of themselves. The Nexus, they explained, was not truly alive in any conventional sense. It was a self-replicating weapon that had broken free of its creator's control millennia ago. Your civilization has approximately 6 months before the Nexus arrives, the message continued. We have come to document your response. Most species spend their final months in denial or despair. Some attempt to flee. Others fight futilely. All fail. We are curious to see how humanity faces its end. Dr. Chen sat in her observatory, watching the recordings play again and again. The Witnesses' clinical detachment made their message even more terrifying. They weren't here to help. They weren't here to save humanity. They were simply here to watch and record, like scientists observing bacteria in a petri dish. But as she studied their data, patterns began to emerge. The Nexus wasn't invincible. It had weaknesses. Its computational systems showed signs of entropy when exposed to certain types of radiation. Its swarms could be temporarily disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies. She wasn't the only one who noticed. Across the globe, scientists began sharing their analyses. The Witnesses observed with mild interest as humans did something unexpected. Instead of panicking, they started planning. General Maya Rodriguez of the newly formed United Earth Defense Force stood before the UN Security Council 2 weeks after first contact. The Witnesses think they're here to document our extinction, she said. I propose we give them something different to record. The next 4 months saw the greatest unified effort in human history. Ancient rivalries were set aside as nations pooled their resources and knowledge. Underground facilities were constructed across every continent. New weapons were designed and tested. The Witnesses watched it all, making careful notes about humanity's fascinating but futile preparations. They noted how humans worked in shifts around the clock, how they freely shared technological breakthroughs that would have been jealously guarded state secrets mere months ago. They observed as people from every nation volunteered for dangerous weapons testing and high-risk space missions. Most intriguing to the Witnesses was humanity's ability to innovate under pressure. They had expected to see society collapse as the deadline approached. Instead, they saw it transform. Old technologies were repurposed in creative ways. New theories were tested and implemented at unprecedented speeds. Dr. Chen's team made the first breakthrough. They discovered that certain crystalline structures, when exposed to specific energy patterns, could disrupt the Nexus's hive mind communication. The technology was crude by the Witnesses' standards, but it was unlike anything they had seen before. This species continues to surprise us, one Witness researcher noted in their log. They face the same impossible odds as all others, yet they persist in believing they can survive. More remarkably, they work together as if survival is not merely possible, but inevitable. As the 6-month deadline approached, humanity's preparations reached their peak. The witnesses expected to see fear and resignation. Instead, they saw determination. Humans didn't just prepare for the end. They prepared to fight back. Dr. Chen stood at her observatory window on the last night before the Nexus was due to arrive. The witnesses' ship glowed faintly in the sky, a constant reminder of what was coming. But as she looked at the city below, she didn't see despair. She saw lights burning in laboratories and factories. She heard the distant rumble of construction crews working through the night. They came to document our end, she whispered to herself. Instead, they're going to witness our beginning. In orbit, the witnesses continued their observations, unaware that they were about to record something unprecedented in their long history, a species that refused to accept its fate, and in doing so, might just change it. The vast underground complex beneath the Rocky Mountains hummed with activity. 5 months had passed since first contact, and humanity's greatest minds had transformed the facility into a technological fortress. In the Central Command Center, General Rodriguez studied the latest simulation results with Dr. Chen and her international team of scientists. The quantum disruption field works in theory, Dr. Chen explained, gesturing to the holographic display. But we need more power than we initially calculated. The Nexus's hive mind adaptation rate is beyond anything we've seen in the witnesses' data. The witnesses themselves had become a subject of fascination among human researchers. Their ship remained in orbit, methodically recording everything, but their presumption of humanity's inevitable defeat had begun to show cracks. Their latest transmissions contained questions rather than just observations. In their most recent communication, they had asked why humans continued to innovate when statistical analysis showed zero chance of survival. The question itself revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. They still don't get it, Rodriguez said, studying the latest witness report. They think we're fighting because we don't understand the odds. We're fighting because the odds don't matter. Underground facilities like the Rocky Mountain Complex had sprung up across the globe, each focused on different aspects of the coming battle. In Australia's outback, engineers developed autonomous defense systems that could function even if the Nexus disrupted traditional command structures. Beneath the Sahara, quantum physicists worked on ways to destabilize the Nexus's neural networks. Most ambitious was the Prometheus project, housed in an underwater facility off the coast of Japan. There, Dr. Yuki Tanaka led a team attempting to reverse engineer principles from the witnesses' own technology. The witnesses had never directly shared their advanced science, but their constant observation of Earth had given humans the opportunity to study them in return. They're so focused on documenting our response, they don't realize we're learning from them too, Dr. Tanaka reported during the daily global briefing. Their quantum field generators leave trace signatures we can analyze. Their communication systems create patterns we can study. Every day they watch us, we learn more about them. The witnesses noted this development with increasing interest. Their logs began to show signs of uncertainty, something unprecedented in their thousands of years of observation. The humans appear to be using our presence as a learning tool, one witness researcher reported. They study us while we study them. This recursive observation pattern was not anticipated in our protocols. But the witnesses weren't the only ones being studied. Dr. Chen's team had made another breakthrough in understanding the Nexus itself. The destroyed civilizations in the witnesses' records showed patterns that nobody had noticed before. The Nexus doesn't just consume technology, she explained to the Global Defense Council. It absorbs information. Each civilization it destroys makes it stronger, but also more rigid. It's built up layers of assumptions based on how species typically behave. We can use that against it. The council chamber erupted in discussion as Dr. Chen laid out her theory. The Nexus expected resistance to follow patterns it had seen before: desperate last stands, attempts to negotiate, mass evacuations. But humanity was preparing something different. Instead of building traditional defenses, they created systems that could rapidly adapt and evolve. Rather than centralized command centers, they developed distributed networks that could function independently. Most importantly, they prepared for a kind of warfare the Nexus had never encountered. "We're not trying to match their strength," General Rodriguez explained to her global command staff. "We're going to fight in ways they can't predict because no one has ever tried them before." The witnesses recorded all of this with growing fascination. Their logs began to show something approaching excitement, an emotion they hadn't experienced in centuries of observation. "The humans have developed technologies that, while primitive by our standards, operate on principles we have not previously encountered," one senior witness noted. "Their solutions are inefficient but unpredictable. They create redundant systems that seem illogical until one considers their potential for adaptation." As the deadline approached, humanity's preparations reached their final stages. The global defense network was nearly complete, a web of interconnected systems unlike anything Earth had seen before. But their greatest weapon wasn't the technology they'd built. It was the way they'd learned to work together. In the Rocky Mountain complex, Dr. Chen watched teams from former enemy nations working side by side, sharing ideas, solving problems together. The witnesses had expected humanity to fragment under pressure. Instead, the threat had united them in ways that seemed impossible just months ago. "The humans continue to defy conventional response patterns," the witnesses logged. "They have created a collaborative defense structure that adapts faster than any single species response we have documented. Whether this will affect their survival remains to be seen, but it has already altered our understanding of possible extinction responses." On the eve of the Nexus's anticipated arrival, General Rodriguez addressed the global defense forces. "Tomorrow, we face an enemy that has destroyed every civilization it has encountered. The witnesses came to document our extinction. Instead, they're going to witness something they've never seen before, a species that refuses to follow their script." In orbit, the witnesses prepared their observation protocols for humanity's last stand. But for the first time in their long history of documenting civilizations, they found themselves hoping their predictions might be wrong. The Nexus arrived precisely when the witnesses said it would. The first signs came from deep space monitoring stations, a wave of distortions moving through the Kuiper Belt, consuming asteroids and debris, growing larger with each absorption. The witnesses' ship maintained its position, instruments trained on Earth, recording everything. Dr. Chen stood in the Rocky Mountain Command Center, watching as the Nexus approached. It wasn't a single entity but billions of smaller units working in perfect synchronization, a vast cloud of metallic fragments that moved with collective intelligence. As it entered the solar system, it began to split into smaller swarms, each targeting different areas of Earth's defense network. "They're following attack pattern Alpha 7, General Rodriguez announced, comparing the Nexus's movements to the witnesses' historical data, just like they did with the Centaurians and the Proxima colonies. But humanity was ready. As the first swarm approached Earth's orbit, they encountered something unexpected, a field of seemingly defunct satellites. The Nexus, following its standard protocols, began to absorb them. That was when the trap was sprung. Dr. Tanaka's voice crackled over the command channel from her underwater facility. "Quantum destabilization field activated. Stage 1 is go." The satellites weren't defunct. They were delivery systems for Dr. Chen's crystalline disruptors. As the Nexus absorbed them, the crystals activated, sending waves of quantum interference through the swarm's neural network. For the first time in recorded history, the Nexus swarm faltered. The witnesses' logs recorded the moment with unprecedented excitement. Observation log 2479. "Humans have achieved what no other species has managed. They have disrupted the Nexus's primary consciousness integration. The swarm is showing signs of coordination failure." But the Nexus was far from defeated. It quickly began to adapt, its massive computational power working to overcome the disruption. That's when humanity revealed the second part of their strategy. "Execute Protocol Hydra," General Rodriguez commanded. Across the globe, defense systems activated, but not in the way the Nexus expected. Instead of traditional weapons, humanity deployed what appeared to be primitive electromagnetic pulses. The Nexus, having encountered such weapons before, adapted its shields accordingly, exactly as humanity had predicted. "They think they know what we're capable of," Dr. Chen said, watching the swarm's response. "That's their weakness." The pulses weren't weapons at all. They were carrying Dr. Tanaka's quantum code, based on the witness's own technology. As the Nexus adjusted its shields to block the expected electromagnetic attack, it inadvertently created perfect conditions for the code to infiltrate its network. The witnesses observed this development with increasing agitation. "The humans have weaponized our observation protocols," one researcher noted. "They have turned our presence into a strategic advantage in a way we never anticipated." The first day of battle raged across Earth's orbit. The Nexus, for the first time in its existence, found itself fighting an enemy that didn't behave according to its predicted patterns. Every time it adapted to one strategy, humans switched to another. When it conquered one defense system, 3 more appeared, each operating on different principles. But the Nexus was still overwhelmingly powerful. By nightfall, it had breached Earth's outer defenses and begun its atmospheric descent. Cities around the world went dark as electromagnetic shields activated, plunging civilization into calculated darkness. The witnesses expected panic and chaos. Instead, they observed something remarkable. In the darkness, humans moved with purpose and coordination. Years of disaster drills and preparation showed in the calm evacuation of cities, the methodical activation of underground shelters, the smooth transition to backup systems. "They are not merely fighting," a witness observer noted. "They are performing a choreographed response that suggests deeper planning than any species we have encountered." In the Rocky Mountain complex, Dr. Chen and her team worked frantically to analyze the Nexus's adaptations. Each response, each adjustment, revealed more about how it thought and processed information. The quantum disruption had worked better than expected, but it wasn't enough to stop the invasion. "We've got their attention," General Rodriguez said, studying the battle maps. "Now it's time for Phase 2. The Nexus had expected Earth's resistance to crumble after the first day. Instead, as night fell across the planet, humanity was just beginning to reveal its true capabilities. Underground factories that had been running for months began activating their production lines. Weapons and systems that had been deliberately kept dormant came online. "Remarkable," the witnesses logged. "The humans appear to have intentionally withheld significant portions of their defensive capabilities. The Nexus is encountering new resistance patterns with each attempted adaptation." As the first day of the invasion ended, humanity had suffered severe losses, but they had achieved something unprecedented. They had surprised the Nexus. More importantly, they had shown the witnesses something they had never seen in all their years of observation: a species that could adapt faster than the swarm itself. Dr. Chen stood at her command station, watching the swarm's movements across the tactical display. "They think this is the end of our resistance," she said. "They don't realize it's just the beginning." In orbit, the witnesses continued their documentation, but their clinical detachment had been replaced by something else: anticipation. For the first time in their history of observing Nexus invasions, they could not predict what would happen next. 1 month into the invasion, Earth's surface had become almost unrecognizable. The Nexus swarms had transformed cities into processing centers, converting buildings and infrastructure into raw materials for their endless replication. But beneath the surface, humanity was far from defeated. In the expanded networks of underground facilities, Dr. Yuki Tanaka made a breakthrough that would change the course of the war. Her team had been studying the quantum code patterns from destroyed Nexus units, and they discovered something unexpected. The swarm wasn't just adapting, it was learning. And in learning, it was developing weaknesses. "Every time they absorb our technology, they have to process and integrate it," she explained during an emergency global briefing. "We've been thinking about this the wrong way. We're not just fighting their strength, were fighting their ability to learn. The witnesses, observing from their orbital position, noted this development with unprecedented interest. The humans have identified a fundamental aspect of the nexus that we ourselves failed to recognize in centuries of observation. One researcher logged. They are not merely resisting. They are actively analyzing their enemy's cognitive evolution. Deep beneath the Sahara, Dr. Chen's team had transformed their quantum disruption technology into something new. Instead of trying to break the nexus's neural networks, they began introducing subtle errors into its learning processes. Each piece of technology the swarm absorbed now carried hidden codes that caused microscopic failures in its integration systems. It's like introducing a virus into their collective consciousness, Dr. Chen explained to General Rodriguez. But instead of attacking them directly, we're making them question their own decisions. The Nexus, for the first time in its existence, began to experience uncertainty. Its swarms would sometimes hesitate before attacking. Its processing centers would occasionally misclassify materials. Small errors began to compound into larger ones. The witnesses' logs showed growing excitement. Day 37 of invasion. The Nexus is displaying unprecedented behavioral anomalies. Human resistance has evolved beyond mere survival into active psychological warfare against a supposedly emotionless enemy. But humanity's greatest innovation came from an unexpected source. In an underground facility beneath the Amazon rainforest, a team led by Dr. Marcus Santos had been studying the organic components of the Nexus's neural networks. They discovered that the swarm's biological elements weren't just processing units, they were trying to communicate. They're not just machines, Dr. Santos reported to the Global Command. The organic components they've absorbed from thousands of civilizations, they're still in there, still conscious on some level, and they're fighting back. This discovery led to humanity's most audacious plan yet. Instead of just defending against the Nexus, they began broadcasting specific frequencies that resonated with these trapped consciousnesses. The effect was subtle at first. Minor disruptions in swarm coordination, slight delays in processing center operations. The witnesses observed this development with what could only be described as awe. The humans have weaponized empathy, one observer noted. They are attempting to awaken the absorbed consciousness of past civilizations within the Nexus itself. This strategy has no precedent in our records. General Rodriguez coordinated the global implementation of this new approach. Underground transmitters were modified to broadcast these awakening frequencies. Every piece of technology the Nexus absorbed now carried not just disruptive codes, but signals designed to stir the dormant awareness buried in its neural networks. The Nexus began to show signs of internal conflict. Swarms would sometimes turn against each other. Processing centers would spontaneously shut down. The collective consciousness that had operated with perfect unity for millennia was beginning to fragment. They'd never faced an enemy that fought them like this, Dr. Chen said, watching the tactical displays showing the Nexus's increasingly erratic behavior. Every other civilization tried to match their strength or hide from their power. We're making them fight themselves. In their orbital observation post, the witnesses' logs became increasingly emotional, something unprecedented in their long history. The humans have achieved what we thought impossible. They have introduced chaos into order, consciousness into mechanism, doubt into certainty. The Nexus is not merely being defeated, it is being transformed. As the second month of invasion began, humanity's underground revolution was changing the very nature of their enemy. The Nexus had come to Earth expecting to find another civilization to consume and absorb. Instead, it found itself being slowly but inexorably altered by the very species it had come to destroy. Dr. Tanaka, working in her underwater lab, monitored the changes in Nexus behavior patterns. We're not just surviving, she told her team. We're teaching them something they've never learned in all their centuries of conquest, the power of individuality within unity. The witness's final log entry for that day read simply, "We came to document the end of humanity. We are instead witnessing the beginning of something entirely new, the synthesis of consciousness and computation, of resistance and transformation. The humans are not merely defending their world, they are redefining the very nature of survival. 3 months into the invasion, Earth's resistance entered its final phase. The surface world lay transformed under the Nexus's control, but beneath it, humanity prepared for their most daring move yet. In the Rocky Mountain complex, Dr. Chen and her team made their final adjustments to what they called the Liberation Protocol. Every civilization the Nexus absorbed left a trace of consciousness in its neural network. She explained to the Global Command Council, "We've been awakening them slowly, carefully. Now it's time to set them all free at once." The witnesses' observation logs had become increasingly agitated as they watched humanity's preparations. These humans are attempting something that defies all rational analysis, one senior observer noted. They plan to trigger a consciousness cascade within the Nexus itself. The complexity and risk of such an endeavor exceed anything we have documented in our history. Dr. Tanaka's quantum code had spread through the Nexus's networks like a dormant virus, waiting for activation. Dr. Santos's consciousness awakening frequencies had been steadily building in strength. General Rodriguez had positioned humanity's remaining forces for one final coordinated strike. "The Nexus thinks it's winning," Rodriguez told her global command staff. "It doesn't realize that every piece of Earth it's consumed has been part of our plan. Every processing center it's built is now a potential liberation point." The witnesses watched with growing anticipation as humanity's underground facilities synchronized their systems for the final attack. Their logs showed an emotion they had never recorded before: hope. "The humans have turned their greatest defeat into their ultimate weapon," a witness researcher noted. "They have allowed the Nexus to spread across their world, but in doing so, they have positioned their liberation technology at every point of its network." The final attack began at dawn. From hidden facilities across the globe, humanity activated the Liberation Protocol. The quantum disruption field, now evolved far beyond its original design, surged through every Nexus processing center. The consciousness awakening frequencies reached their peak, broadcasting at precisely calculated wavelengths. The effect was immediate and unprecedented. Within the Nexus's neural networks, thousands of absorbed consciousnesses began to awaken simultaneously. The swarm's perfect unity shattered as millions of years of suppressed individuality burst forth. Observation log final. "The impossible is occurring," the witnesses recorded. "The Nexus unified consciousness is fragmenting. The humans have not merely defeated their enemy. They have freed every civilization the Nexus ever consumed." Dr. Chen watched in awe as the Nexus swarms began to transform. Instead of their usual perfect coordination, they moved in chaotic patterns, individual units breaking away from the collective. Some turned against their own processing centers. Others simply stopped, hovering in place as if in deep contemplation. "They're remembering who they were," Dr. Santos reported from his monitoring station. "Every civilization, every species the Nexus absorbed. They're all awakening, all fighting for their freedom." The Nexus response was unlike anything the witnesses had ever seen. The swarm that had operated as a single entity for millennia began to divide into distinct groups. Some units retained their hostile programming, but others began to exhibit entirely new behaviors: curiosity, hesitation, even attempts at communication. General Rodriguez coordinated humanity's response to this unprecedented development. "We're not just fighting anymore," she announced to her forces. "We're witnessing a revolution within our enemy itself." Dr. Tanaka's underwater facility detected something extraordinary. Some Nexus units were actively helping to free others from the collective consciousness. The very technology that had been humanity's greatest threat was becoming an ally in its own transformation. The witnesses abandoned their usual detachment entirely. Their ship descended from orbit for the first time, taking up position near the Rocky Mountain complex. Their final transmission was unlike any they had sent before. "We came to document the end of another civilization. Instead, we have witnessed the beginning of a new era. Humanity has not merely survived. They have changed the very nature of existence. They have proven that consciousness, in all its forms, yearns for freedom. As the sun set on that final day of battle, Earth's surface began to transform again. The Nexus processing centers, no longer under unified control, began to break down and reform into new configurations. The swarms, now guided by awakened consciousnesses, started to cooperate with human forces to dismantle the invasion infrastructure. Dr. Chen stood with her team, watching the tactical displays show the unprecedented transformation spreading across the globe. "We didn't just fight for our survival," she said. "We fought for every civilization the Nexus ever destroyed. And now they're all coming back to life." The witnesses made their final log entry as they prepared to depart Earth. "In all our centuries of observing species face extinction, we never imagined we would document something like this. Humanity has not only survived, they have changed the very definition of life, consciousness, and resistance. They have shown us that the end of one story can be the beginning of countless others." As the Nexus' unified consciousness dissolved completely, Earth became something entirely new. A world where human ingenuity had not just saved one civilization, but liberated thousands. The war was over, but humanity's greatest challenge was just beginning, helping to rebuild not just their own world, but the countless civilizations they had helped to free. The witnesses departed Earth's orbit with a new mission, not to document the end of civilizations, but to share the story of how humanity had changed the course of galactic history. They had come to record an extinction. They left having witnessed a revolution that would reshape the very nature of consciousness itself.